Hi, this is Robbie with Tickner Photography. I've had my Sony A99 Mark II for a few months now, and I want to talk a little bit about autofocus. So far, for the most part, I've been pretty impressed with it. Even on my Tamron ScrewDrive 70-200 2.8 lens, it works quite well. There was a feature that I saw when I first got it that looked super cool, an expanded flexible spot. So you can still move your autofocus point around anywhere on the sensor, and then it selects like a little group right around that spot instead of one single spot. And I've found it always seems to choose the wrong little spot in that group. So for me, it hasn't been particularly useful, not as much as I would have hoped. I hope a firmware update someday will correct that. I find myself usually going to a single spot, and when I do that, it's really fast, it's very accurate. There's also a really nifty feature that when it detects a face, if you assign a certain button to, I think it's eye detect autofocus, you can press that button, it'll lock onto an eyeball, which so far has worked really well. I've used it in a couple photo shoots. So I recently went to the San Diego Wild Animal Park. One of the main reasons for going was to try and test a little bit of the autofocus of the camera. For the first half of the day, I primarily used my Tamron 70-200 2.8. And with this lens, it works best if I use the center spot autofocus. I can choose the spot and move it around, but it seems to be most accurate when it's in the middle. So while walking around the Wild Animal Park, I first started at the tiger exhibit, and they were quite active. But unfortunately, it's surrounded by either a really bad fence or really thick plexiglass that people have had their heads smudged against. It's nasty. It's really difficult to shoot through. Nothing is sharp. But, I mean, it's not horrible unless you zoom into one-to-one like this, and you can see it's okay, but it's not great. So I continued walking around for the day, mostly using the 70-200 so I could get closer to things. I'm really impressed with the Sony A99 Mark II sensor. I can zoom into these one-to-one, and they look fantastic. You can see individual hairs. They're really great, because when you're at an animal park like this, you're going to have to crop in. So they're throwing away half of my pixels. But having 42 megapixels to play with gives you options, which is nice. So after seeing a bunch of static animals, I came across something that was much more difficult for the camera to track, mostly because of the lens. So I'm using my 70-200, and these cheetahs had just caught a wild duck running around. I started following them. I'm still using my center focus point. I think I may have gone to the center expanded focus point, so it's using a couple of them. And it was able to track the cheetahs okay. They were moving quite fast. But these images are cropped big time. You can see it's locking on focus okay. And as soon as they slow down a little bit, I mean, this is 100% cropped, so that's not too bad. Let's see here. Then again, 100% crop on these. Sensor is really doing a good job. This was a pretty high contrast scene in the middle of the day. Was a bad situation. And we're zoomed in. We're basically one-to-one. So let's see here. After walking around for a while using the 70-200 pretty much exclusively, we came towards the end of the day. At this wild animal park, they have what they call it a cheetah run. They bring out the cheetahs once a day and they run them down this path next to where you can go. And this was one of the reasons I came, so I could really test the autofocus, push it. For this section, I switched my autofocus point from the center point. You can expand it to the entire screen or a third of the sensor. So I chose the center third of the autofocus sensor. So I had the most leeway. I could still track a subject, but I didn't have to be exact. It would follow and lock on, which it did. I also chose to use the Zeiss 24-70 2.8 because it has the internal focusing motor. It's faster. And that also lived up to expectations. As you can see, the cheetah takes off, it accelerates from, I think, 0 to 60 in a couple body lengths. So right here it's just starting, right here it's probably already going 40 miles an hour. And this camera firing 12 frames a second, autofocus between everything, it locked on to every single photo, or every single shot was in focus. It was really surprising. There was a little bit of motion blur just 'cause the day was horrible. It was raining right now and I could only go to about a 500th of a second. So I'd love to go back in the middle of the day when I could really increase my shutter speed. But there's one slightly out of focus. The rest, it nailed. I'm getting a little bit of motion blur here just because of the shutter speed, but the actual focus, it's there. Then a second run, I was trying to wait a little bit longer. Focus-wise, it was amazing. I was really impressed using this lens. Sony A99 Mark II autofocus lived up to my expectations, which I was really happy about. So I still haven't had the opportunity to take the camera to a really difficult, like a nightclub environment. That'll be next month sometime. So after I do that, I'll come back and I'll do another review and talk specifically about that type of environment because there's nothing else really like it. It's difficult. But so far I've had the camera for a couple months and I'm quite happy with it. I hope at some point there's a firmware update which makes it a little bit faster and might help with battery life a little because it does consume quite a bit. But all in all, I would recommend this camera. I hope you found this somewhat useful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Otherwise, like and subscribe. Thank you.